Season 9, baby.
Wait, I never noticed this before, but the show already revealed how everything falls apart in Rick and Morty, and almost nobody registered the weight of it. One detail buried deep in the aftermath of the central finite curve collapsing doesn't just hint at chaos ahead. It quietly confirms that Season 9 is not introducing a new villain at all. It is bringing back the one force that was never truly defeated. And the show is clearly hinting that Evil Morty was never an ending. He was a transition. Because when you look at the state of the multiverse after Rick Prime's death, something feels structurally wrong. Rick Sanchez finally got his revenge, the emotional arc seemed to close, and the series gave itself permission to move forward. But that's exactly where the tension begins. Peace in Rick and Morty has never lasted longer than a breath. Every resolution has been a setup in disguise. And this time, the silence left behind by Rick Prime isn't closure, it's absence of control. The kind of absence that creates space for something far more calculated to return. The show is clearly hinting that Evil Morty didn't disappear after escaping the central finite curve. He didn't retire, he didn't settle, and he definitely didn't win and walk away in any traditional sense. What he did was far more dangerous. He stepped outside the system that defined Rick's dominance in the first place. And that single action changes everything about how Season 9 must function narratively. Because if Rick Prime represented obsession and violence, Evil Morty represents structure-level intelligence. He doesn't fight Rick in episodes. He rewrites the rules Rick depends on. And there's a detail most people brush past. When the curve collapsed, we saw infinite realities spill open, but we never saw who immediately began reorganizing them. That silence is the clue. The show is clearly hinting that someone is already shaping the post-curve multiverse from the outside, and that kind of precision doesn't belong to random variants or surviving Citadel fragments. It belongs to someone who already demonstrated they understand the system better than the Ricks who built it. Evil Morty's last known behavior wasn't escape and panic. It was escape with direction. He didn't flee from danger. He exited a closed equation. And once you understand that, every assumption about his absence starts to feel intentional. Even Rick's lack of pursuit after Rick Prime's death becomes suspicious in retrospect. Because Rick Sanchez doesn't just stop chasing threats. He overcorrects. He spirals. He investigates every trace. Yet Evil Morty is left untouched, unmentioned, almost structurally ignored. That absence is louder than any confrontation. The show is clearly hinting that Evil Morty's return in Season 9 won't be announced with violence or spectacle. It will begin with systems behaving incorrectly. Small fractures in reality. Repeated inconsistencies in dimensional travel. Ricks encountering universes that feel pre-curated, as if someone has already filtered which realities are allowed to exist freely again. That kind of control doesn't come from the Citadel anymore. The Citadel was burned into irrelevance. It comes from someone who has already stepped beyond it. And this is where the theory deepens. Because if Evil Morty truly escaped into the greater multiverse beyond the curve, then he is no longer bound by Rick-centric reality. That means he now has access to something far more terrifying than infinite Ricks. He has access to infinite systems that were previously hidden from Rick's ego-driven universe. And that shifts him from fugitive status to architect status. Not a villain in the traditional sense, but something closer to a restructuring force. Meanwhile, Rick is left in a universe that is slowly losing its defined hierarchy. And Rick without hierarchy is Rick without purpose. That's not just emotional instability, that's narrative instability. And the show is clearly hinting that Season 9 will explore what happens when Rick is no longer the smartest man in the only sandbox he was ever allowed to understand. There's another clue hidden in the way recent arcs have treated Morty. Morty is becoming less reactive and more observant. He's noticing patterns faster, predicting Rick's behavior with uncomfortable accuracy, and most importantly, surviving situations without Rick's direct intervention more often than before. That evolution is not accidental. The show is clearly hinting that Morty is being shaped in parallel to Evil Morty's larger design, almost like a mirrored endpoint. One Morty chose escape through domination of systems, the other is learning survival inside collapsing systems. And when two parallel evolutions exist in the same narrative, they are eventually designed to intersect. Season 9, then, isn't about introducing a new villain. It is about reactivating a dormant one whose presence was never removed from the board. Evil Morty doesn't need to return with a grand entrance because he never truly left the equation. He only stepped outside the frame where Rick could observe him. That is the real shift. Because Rick's greatest weakness has always been control disguised as intelligence. He believes understanding something makes it containable. But Evil Morty proved the opposite. Understanding the system is how you leave it. And once someone learns how to leave, they also learn how to redesign what's left behind. The show is clearly hinting that Season 9 will begin with anomalies that don't behave like typical multiversal threats. No invasions, no wars, no singular antagonist declaring intent. Instead, reality itself will begin to feel edited, like someone is trimming possibilities, removing chaotic branches, allowing only specific outcomes to persist. That kind of subtlety is more terrifying than destruction, because it suggests intent without visibility. Rick will notice, of course. But noticing won't be enough this time, because every time Rick has faced Evil Morty, he has been reacting. And Evil Morty's entire philosophy is built around acting before reaction becomes possible. And here is where the prediction sharpens. If Season 9 truly brings him back, it will not frame Evil Morty as a returning villain in the traditional sense. It will frame him as a consequence. A result of everything Rick built collapsing under its own logic. The central finite curve was never just a prison for other universes. It was also a cage for Rick's ego. And Evil Morty was the first to step outside that cage and realize the universe doesn't need Rick to function. So when he reappears, it will not be to conquer Rick. It will be to finalize the system Rick thought he controlled. And that is the most dangerous evolution this story can take. Because at that point, Rick is no longer the center of the narrative conflict. He becomes part of a structure already being rewritten by someone who learned how to leave the board entirely and still move the pieces from outside it. Normally, even the smallest inconsistency triggers his paranoia, his scanning, and his breakdown of physics and probability. But here, he moves forward like he's unconsciously accepting rules that haven't been explained yet. The show is clearly hinting that this isn't ignorance, it's adjustment. As if Rick himself were being conditioned to operate inside a version of reality that is no longer fully transparent to him, even though he believes he still holds the highest level of control. And that's where the real implication hits. If Rick can be quietly moved off-center without noticing, then the multiverse is no longer a sandbox he dominates. It's a system that can evolve around him. Every step after Episode 1 becomes less about survival against external threats and more about uncovering why perception itself is being filtered. Because once you accept that the ending scene was edited by intent rather than coincidence, it becomes clear the real conflict of Season 9 isn't coming later. It already started in that moment, and almost nobody saw it happen.